So next we'll just talk about dual agency, specifically two people in the same company, one representing the seller, one representing the buyer. Just to state the obvious, that is considered dual agency. It is allowed in California. It's not allowed in certain other states, but it is allowed in California. It is very precarious, so just in the scope of risk management, just keep in mind, all E&O companies, so the insurance companies, will ask what percent of your transactions involved dual agency. Because the higher that percent, the higher the likelihood is that there's some claim that they're gonna have to pay out because of the type of risk that these transactions are. First off, I would say if you don't have to have dual agency, don't do it. If you are in a situation where there's not really a way around it or not an easy way around it, you can have dual agency. Keep in mind on the contract, you're checking the right boxes, so that's key, right? Because you're legally required to disclose dual agency up front, and so you're gonna do that by checking the correct box in the confirmation of agency relationships on the RPA, so you can look for that section. Secondly, this becomes particularly murky with teams. So sometimes we've seen, say, a husband and wife team, or it's a couple that works together. For whatever reason, that couple will decide, you know, we're gonna have the husband represent the buyer and the wife will represent the seller. And we feel like that's an extremely murky scenario. Like, why would you do that? How is it believable to anyone on the outside that confidential information shared from the seller is not leaking over and being shared with the agent of the buyer? And so if there's a conflict, the agent's holding things confidential is very likely to be considered suspect by anybody looking at that file, whether that's an investigator from the Department of Real Estate, an attorney, a court, whoever. Why would you do it that way? I almost think it's simpler and more honest, unless there's some grand extenuating circumstance, but it's just generally, I would consider it more direct just to say, have both husband and wife represent the seller, and also both husband and wife represent the buyer. Then at least the buyer and seller will feel like it's dual agency. They know it's dual agency, and there's not this imaginary suspect line of confidentiality between them. You still have that line that as representative of the seller, you can't share anything that you shouldn't share to the buyer, and same with the buyer, you can't share anything that you shouldn't share to the seller. The real obvious one here is about price and negotiations. So this is the one that the Department of Real Estate will cite that you have to watch out for. If the buyer will pay more, you can't relay that to the seller. If the seller will take less, you can't relate that to the buyer. That needs to be a firm line. That's one of, I would say, the easier lines to watch out for. It's just be honest on that one. The more complicated ones where you find yourself deeper in the quicksand later on, which is, you know, things having to do with a disclosure, different reports or investigations as that result as a part of the inspection period, concerns around the financing, what do you relay or not relay, what's the buyer okay relaying, that maybe they had some concerns between them and the lender, are you obligated to share that with the seller or not? And it may depend. There's really an infinite number of nuances here that you can't cover in a video. This is where a mentor or manager becomes really an invaluable resource. But just know, price just comes down to integrity, which should be simple. You're not relaying anything about price you shouldn't relay. Some of those other areas as you get deeper in the transaction, more nuanced. You could have the best intention, still have a hard time figuring out what do I share, what do I not share. So where you want to check in with someone just more experienced than you. That's really it for dual agency for the purposes of this discussion. There's a lot more to think about on dual agency. We do cover elsewhere in the course, but as far as quicksand, keep that in mind when you're talking about dual agency. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you learned something or if this helped you solve a problem, follow me for more.